Welcome everybody. My name is Ben Miller. Info's on the board there, CWNE number 12. Twitter is Ben _sniff Wi-Fi. And I want to talk a little bit about channel utilization. Channel utilization is something we've obviously heard a couple times today. I work for USC, and in talking with our primary vendor, we sometimes talk a little bit about channel utilization, but I feel like it's something that sometimes gets overused and focused on too much, and so I want to talk a little bit about kind of why that is and why, for the most part, I ignore channel utilization. It's something that it doesn't mean you don't need a spectrum analyzer, but it's not something that I pay a lot of attention to. I start out here with a real world example. This is just from something that I saw at work. One channel about 8% utilization, the other channel about 20% utilization, and hopefully the pictures come in relatively clearly. At the time I'm doing the little testing here, both of them look relatively clean in the spectrogram. Obviously the right hand side, you can kind of see that there's that red line at the bottom that's giving away kind of the the issue there. And the point there is that even though there was a lower channel utilization, once I started doing a throughput test, the throughput test was much lower in the first example, and so it mentions there kind of the other things I did, loading just a website, and I want to talk about some of the reasons why that is, why you might see channel utilization relatively low and the channel struggling, or channel utilization relatively high and the channel still working very well. Before you go out and do what this shoddily drawn person here is doing and tossing the whole thing. So I'll start out with kind of the theory behind channel utilization. It was touched on a little bit earlier on by Jim. Time is the one thing that we don't have the ability to stretch in any way. 10 seconds is 10 seconds, 5 seconds is 5 seconds. Wireless LAN devices have to share the channel. So if a certain amount of channel time is being utilized, that means that channel time is unavailable for other devices to be able to use it. The reason, though, that I really don't like using the channel utilization statistic, and I find that other things are a little bit more useful when analyzing a network, is because of the fact that the channel utilization is just looking at raw activity. It's just looking at, is this channel busy at a given moment, and what percentage of those given moments is a channel busy. And I find that it kind of ignores a little bit about how Wi-Fi works, about how the 802.11 standard operates. One issue in looking at channel utilization is some channel utilization is perfectly fine and good, and other channel utilization is not so good, is sort of bad. And we talk a little bit about why that is here. And the issue is just that a spectrum analyzer, when it shows you channel utilization numbers, does not have the ability to differentiate between the good and the bad. An amount of time that's taken up with a successful frame transmission or a high rate frame transmission is going to be sort of efficiently used channel time. If there's a low rate frame transmission, if there's an unsuccessful frame transmission, that's not a great use of channel time. But a channel utilization tool, a spectrum analyzer, doesn't really have the ability to differentiate between those two. I have a little kind of white slide so I can do some drawing here. If we have kind of just a standard 802.11 AC frame transmission, you're going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40 microseconds for that physical layer header. And then you'll start your variable rate data. And if you have your variable rate data, and let's say you have about a 315 megabit per second frame, that's going to be somewhere on the order of another 40 microseconds kind of going across the channel, using your channel. And so that's an 80 microsecond period where the channel is kind of efficiently utilized, where it's well utilized. But if you have low rate traffic, if you're down, say, in the mid 60s, let's say about 65 megabits per second, you still have the same approximately 40 microsecond physical layer, but that data link layer, your 802.11 header and your actual application data, that's going to be in the hundreds. That's going to be somewhere around 180 microseconds that you're using there. And so when you add that up, you can kind of have maybe 3 of these things happening in the same amount of time as you have one of the other things happening. I forgot to mention, this is all with a 1500 byte frame. That's where these numbers are calculated. And so you can essentially have about the same amount of channel utilization with approximately triple the amount of traffic going across. Similar thing applies to wireless collisions. If some of those 315 megabit per second frames are not received successfully, then the exact same frame has to be resent. Then that's sort of a waste of your 80 microseconds, not even counting whatever CSMA CA time then has to happen between the frames. And that's kind of an inefficient use of channel time, but you can't tell that in channel utilization. You're still going to see the same channel utilization numbers, whether it's successful data or unsuccessful, whether it's high rate data or low rate data. And that's kind of a big issue of why I sometimes cringe a little bit when I see too much stuff about channel utilization. I mentioned a couple of other things to note about channel utilization. Channel utilization does not necessarily show channel availability, just because of how the 802.11 protocol works with CSMA CA, with carrier sense, multiple access, with collision avoidance. This was kind of touched on a little bit earlier on in one of the presentations, but every device on a channel, I was using channel number 157 back there. Every device on channel 157 is going to essentially get an equal opportunity to access that channel. So even if I have very, very high utilization, even if there's a lot of data going across the channel, a new device is still going to have an opportunity to access the channel. So it doesn't necessarily mean that a high usage channel, a high channel utilization channel is a problem, or a low channel utilization channel is not a problem. And so that's kind of another issue with channel utilization. The last issue I'm mentioning is an issue for those of you who use channel bonding. If you don't use the 20 megahertz wide channel, if you use the 40, or if you use the 80 megahertz wide channel, maybe there's some folks that use the 160, the primary channel is always going to have more natural channel utilization. The only part of the channel that's used by management traffic or control traffic is the primary part of the channel. This is a screenshot that I took earlier in the day today. There's one of the conference center 2 access points has a primary channel of channel 149. It's using the 40 megahertz width. At the time I took the screenshot, it wasn't particularly busy, so I kind of purposely wanted to take a screenshot when there wasn't a tremendous amount of data, and hopefully you can see it okay, but the channel number 149 half is just a lot more naturally busy, and that tends to happen because of the fact that management and control traffic only operates on the primary channel. So the management traffic, that'd be your beacons, your probes, any connection association stuff. Control traffic would be acknowledgements, request to send, clear to send, etc. I'm kind of being very negative about channel utilization, and I am. I'm not a big fan of doing much troubleshooting with channel utilization, but then the question is, well, what do you want to use instead? And at least in my opinion, I'm a big believer in the usage of protocol analyzers. Protocol analyzers allow you to capture the wireless frames going across the network, and then you can see whether the traffic was high rate traffic or low rate traffic. whether the traffic was a successful communication or if it ended in a collision. The little retries, the retry flag in the 802.11 header will tell you whether something was successful or not successful. I mentioned a couple other things. Some of these things that you can look for with a channel are things that you don't necessarily need a protocol analyzer for, but high number of client devices, whether there's a lot of management traffic. Sometimes unassociated clients send a lot of management traffic. Those are the types of things that I would recommend looking for. And if you do have a spectrum analyzer, it still is good for some stuff. I just always encourage people to kind of limit their use of the spectrum analyzer to two primary things, which is number one, trying to identify interference, and then number two, trying to locate the source of the interference. So that's my little thing on channel utilization and kind of what some of the alternatives are. I enjoyed speaking with y'all.